I'm sure you've heard it before, you can't absorb a lot of protein in a single intake. You might have heard of a supposedly unmovable limit, 25 to 1 ounce per intake at most. You might also have heard that the excess protein that you can't use is discarded. In this way, consuming more protein would be useless, it would be a waste of money, make your urine more expensive, and in the worst case, compromise your health. But is this really the case? Today's video will change what you believe to be true about protein and how you should take it in your daily life. Do you practice intermittent fasting and fear muscle loss? Have you always found it tedious and impractical to have to be ingesting protein continuously throughout the day? Does taking Tupperware to work, university, and the gym and preparing them drain your energy? Then this video is for you. Traditionally, we've thought muscle protein utilization is a saturable process. What does it imply? Protein, after consumption, is digested into amino acids which are absorbed into the blood, transported to the muscle, and incorporated there. In this organ, depending on the needs of the moment, muscle protein synthesis increases up to a certain amount of ingested protein, having a ceiling from which you would discard the rest of the protein that your body cannot use. It's a logical process. Your body utilizes what's needed and discards the excess. The workers who build a building should not and cannot use more bricks than necessary to properly build that building. No more, no less. Therefore, binging on protein wouldn't do much in terms of muscle gains. In fact, good previous studies have quantified this optimal dose of protein per intake, setting it at 0.0084,505 ounces of protein per kilogram of weight per intake in young adults and at 0.40 in older adults. From these dose-response studies come the famous headlines that your body can't absorb more than 0.88 ounces of protein per intake. Here's the first clarification. There is a lot of confusion between absorbing protein and using protein. Your body absorbs all the protein you give it as long as there is no malabsorptive digestive condition and your digestive enzymes are in shape. Your feces should not have amino acids or have very few amino acids. However, the excess amino acids from the digestion of those proteins will oxidize or even be eliminated in the urine when your body has no compelling reason to use them. Just like if we store glucose and fatty acids for later use, we do not have the ability to indefinitely store amino acids. Your body uses the amino acids it needs to maintain its functionality, but no more. This is the physiological basis combined with the evidence I just mentioned that supports the whole idea that you can only take advantage of a certain and limited amount of protein per meal. This led to recommendations for anyone who wanted to maximize their muscle anabolic processes to make smaller but repeated protein intakes throughout the day, which is technically called protein boluses. Why? Well, this would theoretically lead to peaks of muscle protein synthesis throughout the day and therefore maximize the total cumulative muscle protein synthesis throughout the day. Wow, it would be a typical intake pattern of the bodybuilder who eats every 2 or 3 hours, sometimes obsessively, even sometimes getting up at midnight to do it. This, as we will see, and luckily does not make much sense. What was the main limitation of these studies? Well, they were very short-term studies in the sense that they evaluated muscle protein synthesis only in the 3 to 4 hours after a protein intake, which is complemented by the findings found in this new and recent work. In the study, young individuals and recreational athletes were given 3 different protein doses, 0.88 ounces, 3.5 ounces, or a 0-ounce placebo. Hours before, the participants did a standardized strength training. What were the findings? Before diving into that, let's recall it was about muscle protein synthesis for clear understanding. Your body balances anabolic building and catabolic destroying processes. An example of an anabolic process would be storing fat, and an example of a catabolic process would be using that fat to produce energy. In the muscle, the main anabolic process is muscle protein synthesis necessary to grow the muscle in response to a mechanical stimulus, training. This process can be accurately quantified in studies, and that's what they did in this particular work. When muscle protein synthesis exceeds muscle catabolism, we say that we have a positive nitrogen balance and your body would be in a position to build muscle, repair tissues, or recover from a stressor. The opposite would be a negative nitrogen balance or a situation of predominant catabolism, like the one we would have in a chronic disease or during a half marathon. I emphasize the word predominant. There are always active processes of catabolism and anabolism. What matters is the relative weight of each of them. Having understood this, now yes, what were the results of the study? Very curiously, in the first 4 hours post-ingestion, there were no significant differences in muscle protein synthesis between the group of 25 and 3.5 ounces of protein. But the magic started afterwards. If what happened between 4 and 12 hours post-ingestion was evaluated, the group of 3.5 ounces of protein had a muscle protein synthesis 40% higher than the group of 0.88 ounces. Wow, that in a longer time horizon, more protein in a single intake beat less protein in a single intake. Interesting, right? But how does this change your day-to-day? Clearly, we must continuously monitor scientific evidence, as what is considered established knowledge can change rapidly. What practical insights can we gain from this? Well, several. First, we waste excess protein more than we thought we wasted excess protein. What happens is that these amino acids require more time to be digested, absorbed, and incorporated into tissues like muscle. The result is that when we compare smaller and more frequent protein intakes with larger and less frequent intakes and evaluate muscle protein synthesis over a total of 24 hours, we see that it is similar in both cases as long as the total amount of protein ingested is the same. In conclusion, the total amount of protein you ingest in a day matters more than when you take it. And second conclusion, if for whatever reason you have a higher protein intake, you're going to eat out, you have a celebration, whatever, you're not going to waste everything that exceeds 0.88 ounces of protein. Does this mean that there is no limit to the protein your body is able to utilize? No, there's a limit to protein intake, and more isn't better, but this limit is broader than assumed. On the other hand, something that makes more evolutionary sense, think about an individual who 15,000 years ago only had access to a protein source every few days as a result of a successful hunt, and who also couldn't store it for long because it would rot. Why would our biology limit us to utilizing only 0.88 ounces of protein from an entire boar? How could it discard the remaining extremely valuable amino acids that could mean life or death? This is logical. Our metabolism isn't perfect, yet it's far from foolish. This is a clear example. Intermittent fasting and muscle. This evidence aligns perfectly with previous studies on intermittent fasting. In them, trained individuals who ingest their calories and protein in an 8-hour or 12-hour feeding window are compared. Any differences? None. No differences in muscle mass were found between the two groups. In fact, when intake is further restricted to a 4-hour window, no differences in muscle are found either, as long as, and this is the key, total calories and proteins are equivalent. Once again, the total daily amount of protein seems to be more important than its timing, which takes pressure off anyone who feels more comfortable with a lower intake frequency. How do we apply this to real life? Having come this far, you may be wondering how this changes your daily behavior regarding protein. Let's assume that you are an active person who trains and also wants to protect their muscle mass. If you're sedentary, the information in this video isn't very useful. Since you maximize sports adaptations with no more than 1.5 or 0.056449134 ounces of protein per kilogram per day, this study opens the door for us to choose one of the following two paths. Consider a 70-kilogram male for this example. The hypothetical man could split his 3.95 ounces protein target into 4 parts at breakfast, post-workout, lunch, and dinner, yielding around 0.98 ounces of protein per meal. This popular method has many advantages, including the easy achievement of protein targets with a scoop of whey protein, 3.5 ounces of chicken or fish, 7 ounces of lentils, or 8.8 ounces of cooked chickpeas. The downside? None, except you need to schedule and plan your next protein intake. Of course, you can do 4, 5, 6, or 7 intakes. This is just an example with 4. The second path would be to divide those 3.95 ounces of target protein into 2 larger intakes of 0.028 ounces of protein per kilo, which could be, for example, lunch and dinner. This would fit with someone who does intermittent fasting. However, this someone should reach 1.94 ounces per intake. The advantage is that you have less to plan, and it's easier to comply if you spend a lot of time away from home, or if you have a long work schedule, or if you don't feel like cooking or planning meals continuously. The downside is that depending on your appetite, 1.94 ounces of protein can be difficult to ingest. Doubling the quantities from earlier examples reveals it's a large amount of food. Of course, a very necessary disclaimer is that the study we analyzed today evaluated young and healthy individuals. If you have a pathology that involves anabolic resistance, I explain it here, poor intestinal absorption, or an exacerbated catabolic state, for example cancer, the results may not be applicable to your case. And of course, if you have advanced chronic kidney disease, to date the evidence tells us that we do need to limit nitrogen intake and therefore protein. Now you know that as long as you train and there is no other pathological barrier, your body can take advantage of more than 0.88 ounces of protein per intake. This gives rise to being more flexible and less neurotic with food, which is always welcome. If this video has been useful to you, remember that in this free mailing list, I teach you everything I know to optimize your health and prevent disease. See you in the next video. Thanks for your attention, a big hug, and keep empowering.